Hey guys! Tonight we begin with a feast where forks don't exist, table manners are optional, and the food might be fancier than it is edible. It's the Middle Ages, inside the great hall of a castle, where torches flicker, dogs roam under the tables, and someone is definitely about to spill oil on your shoes. The world is louder, grazier, and the banquet is as much about showing off as it is about eating. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations! You've just been invited to a medieval banquet. Just don't ask what's in the stew. The first thing that strikes you, before you've even stepped inside, is the smell. It curls under the heavy oak doors, and out into the courtyard like an invisible hand, tugging at your stomach in ways both pleasant and suspicious. Smoke, roasting meat, spilled ale, damp rushes, and, if we're being honest, a faint background hum of unwashed humanity. It is not the kind of scent you'd bottle into perfume. But here in the medieval world, it's the unmistakable announcement of a feast. You smell it before you hear the music, before you see the flickering glow leaking from the windows. It's as if the entire castle is breathing out, sighing, "Tonight, we eat." The doors are heaved open by two boys who can't possibly be more than 12, but who look like they've spent the better part of their lives carrying buckets and hauling firewood. They bow in unison with a kind of nervous choreography, clearly drilled into them by someone scarier than you'll ever be. Beyond them the hall stretches long and wide, a cavern of timber beams and stone walls painted orange by hundreds of candles. The air is so thick with smoke and steam that it seems alive. You half expect it to wrap around your cloak like a friendly dog. At first glance it seems everyone in the world is already here. Long trestle tables run the length of the hall, packed shoulder to shoulder with nobles, merchants, hangers-on, and the occasional guest who looks like they stumbled in by mistake, but intends to stay until the ale runs dry. A great fire pit roars in the center, its smoke slipping upward through a hole in the roof that does a poor job of convincing you it was designed for ventilation. At the far end, elevated on a dais, sits the lord of the manor and his household, already surrounded by musicians scraping fiddles and servants, balancing trenchers piled high with food. Your eyes flick everywhere at once, trying to drink it all in. The glitter of goblets, the greasy shine of roasted goose skin. The flash of a dagger as someone cuts into a hunk of bread. Servants scuttle between benches like mice through tall grass, each carrying jugs of wine or platters so heavy you wonder if their arms will give out halfway. And above it all the din, laughter, shouting. The occasional Latin blessing muttered by a cleric, who clearly feels out of place among all this chewing and burping. It's overwhelming and yet strangely inviting. If you've ever walked into a modern wedding reception, at the exact moment when the buffet table has just opened, you already know the feeling. Multiply that by 50, remove refrigeration, and add a faint chance of dying from salmonella, and you're almost there. You move forward, and the floor crunches underfoot. The rushes, straw and herbs strewn across the stone to soak up spills, are well past their prime. What once smelled faintly of lavender and mint now smells more like spilled beer, trampled food, and dog. Because yes, there are dogs here, weaving between the benches with a confidence that says they belong more than you do. Every so often a bone or chunk of bread is flung casually to the floor, and the hounds snap it up before returning to their rounds. Someone waves you toward a bench, and you squeeze into a narrow gap between a woman in a velvet gown whose sleeves could double as picnic blankets, and a man who already looks 3 mugs of all past polite conversation. He grins at you, belches, and offers a greeting you don't quite catch. It's either "welcome, friend," or "wants a meal pie." Either way, he's friendly, so you nod and smile, as if this is exactly the sort of company you were hoping for. A trencher is slapped down in front of you. It's not a plate. Don't even think about plates. It's half a loaf of yesterday's bread, hollowed out and flattened into a makeshift dish. Onto it lands a ladleful of stew, so thick it could double as mortar. You glance down the table and realize everyone else's bread plates are soaking up grease and gravy with cheerful abandon. If you're squeamish about double dipping, medieval dining will cure you fast. The man beside you leans in, his breath a cocktail of onions and ale. "Best stew this side of the river," he says, scooping up a chunk with his dagger and popping it into his mouth. You nod again, because what else can you do? Cutlery is a rarity here. Forks won't be fashionable for centuries. You eat with your hands, your dagger, and whatever dignity you can muster. Just try not to stab yourself while attempting to spear a carrot. It wouldn't be the first time someone left a banquet with more than indigestion. Across the hall a minstrel begins to sing, his voice carrying above the noise with surprising clarity. The lyrics are in French, which half the hall doesn't understand, but the rhythm is infectious enough to draw clapping from every corner. The woman beside you flutters her massive sleeves in time with the music, nearly knocking your stew into your lap. You smile weakly, balancing your trencher like a tightrope walker. This is the medieval equivalent of being stuck next to someone at karaoke who thinks they're the main event. The food keeps coming. Servants parade past with whole roasted boars, their jaws stuffed with apples as if smiling at their own demise. Platters of pigeons arranged like a feathery mountain. Fish glistening with sauces so pungent you can smell them from 3 tables away. And then the sweets. Marchpane shaped into castles, candied fruits sparkling like treasure. It is abundance designed to impress, to announce the wealth and power of your host. Nobody here will go hungry tonight, though tomorrow, the villagers outside these walls might gnaw on stale crusts and turnips. Banquets are less about filling bellies than displaying power. You try a bite of goose, and the grease runs down your fingers to your wrist. Napkins don't exist. The solution is simple: wipe your hands on the tablecloth, or on your neighbor's sleeve if you're bold. Everyone does it, and no one complains, though your modern sensibilities might twitch with each smear. In fact, most of what happens here would make a modern health inspector faint. Raw meat sits on the same platter as cooked. Hand-washing is more suggestion than rule, and leftovers often reappear at the next meal. And yet, somehow, people survive. Mostly. It's at this point you notice the dogs again, now joined by a goose that seems to have wandered in from somewhere. It honks indignantly as a child tries to catch it, setting off a wave of laughter down the table. You can't help but smile too, even though the goose ends up flapping past you, nearly tipping your trencher. Honestly, it feels less like a formal dinner, and more like a chaotic family gathering where the guest list ballooned, and no one dared say no. If you think medieval people were stiff and humorless, one night here will cure you of that. They laugh at spills, cheer for singers, jeer at each other's table manners, and generally carry on like the feast might never end. Which, in some cases, it won't. Banquets can go on for hours, sometimes days, with food and drink flowing until everyone collapses in exhaustion, or the ale finally runs out. Imagine Thanksgiving dinner, except instead of passing out in front of the TV, you might end the night dancing in a smoky hall until dawn. A trumpet blares suddenly, sharp enough to cut through the noise. The Lord on the dais rises, lifting his goblet high. The hall falls into a ragged hush. He speaks in a booming voice, thanking his guests, praising the cooks and, most importantly, reminding everyone of his own generosity. Every word is rehearsed, every gesture calculated. This is theatre, and the audience knows its role. Cheer loudly, drink deeply, and remember who paid for your supper. You clap along, feeling the weight of the moment. This isn't just a meal, it's politics served with gravy. As the speech ends and the music swells again, you realize you've only scratched the surface of what this night holds. There are rituals yet to come, courses stranger than anything you've seen so far, and rules of etiquette that, if broken, could ruin you faster than spilling wine on the Lord's cloak. And if you think goose grace and drunken neighbors are the worst of it, well, just wait until you see how the servants clear the tables. The food keeps coming in waves, and each one is more bewildering than the last. A servant sets down a pie the size of a cartwheel, its crust puffed high and golden. You expect him to slice into it and serve the contents, but instead he steps back as the steward makes a grand announcement. With a flourish, the crust is broken open, and out fly a dozen live birds, flapping and squawking through the smoky air. The hall erupts in shrieks of laughter and cheers as the birds careen past the rafters, scattering feathers into your stew. You duck, of course, because nothing says special occasion quite like a pigeon to the face. The pie itself contains a mixture of minced meat and spices, now half cold from all the ceremony, but no one cares. The spectacle was the point. Banquets aren't just about eating, they're about marveling, gasping, and telling stories afterward. Tomorrow someone will say, "Did you see the birds?" And everyone will nod as though they've witnessed a miracle. Not a kitchen boy shoving doves into pastry. You scoop up another bite of stew with your trencher bread and chew slowly. The bread is already soggy, a sponge for every drop of grace and sauce it has endured. By the end of the meal, it'll be more stew than loaf, a soft, collapsing slab destined for the dogs or the poor outside. You think briefly about saving yours for later, then realize you'll be hard pressed to keep it from falling apart in your hands now. So you eat, tearing pieces with your teeth like everyone else. At the days, the Lord is served first, his dishes more extravagant than anything reaching the lower tables. A whole swan is presented, its feathers replaced after roasting so it looks pristine, regal, almost alive again. It's a performance of wealth so, over the top you can't help but grin. To eat a swan is not just to dine, it's to declare you own the river itself, its birds, and the men who hunt them. Around you the noise swells again. Someone's telling a bawdy story at the far end, and the laughter ripples down the benches like falling dominoes. The woman with the picnic blanket sleeves leans close, repeating the punchline to her neighbor, and then both cackle until they nearly spill their ale. You catch only fragments. Something about a monk, a donkey, and a barrel of wine. But apparently it's hilarious. This is the medieval version of TikTok. A good joke quickly spread, shared over and over until everyone's heard it twice. The ale itself deserves mention. It flows freely, frothy and warm. Carried in jugs so big they look like they should come with instructions. You raise your mug, sip, and nearly choke. It's not unpleasant, malty, heavy, filling, but it has the consistency of liquid bread and the strength of a mild sedative. No wonder half the hall is already swaying on their benches. Water isn't trusted, ale is safer, cleaner, and, frankly, more fun. Children drink it too, though theirs is weaker. More like flavored broth than a ticket to stumbling home. A jester tumbles into view now, brightly clothed in mismatched colors that look like a chessboard, and a fruit basket had an argument. He capers, flips, and then stops abruptly to waggle his tongue at a knight, who clearly takes himself too seriously. The hall roars. You notice the knight doesn't laugh, but everyone else does, and here that's what matters. Banquets thrive on mocking the mighty, if only for a night. It's a relief valve, a way to laugh at authority without ending up in the stocks. Speaking of authority, etiquette here is a slippery creature. You're supposed to share your trencher with your neighbor, which sounds friendly until you realize you're both dipping greasy fingers into the same pool of sauce. You're not meant to lick your knife, though plenty do. You should avoid scratching yourself too obviously at the table, but judging from the man across from you, this rule is honored mostly in the breach. And burping, perfectly acceptable, even polite, so long as you do it with gusto. Imagine a world where letting out a hearty belch earns you applause, instead of side eyes. That's medieval dining for you. As the courses parade by, you notice the hierarchy at work. The closer you sit to the dais, the better the food. Down here in the middle ranks you're getting plenty, but at the far ends of the hall the trenchers look suspiciously empty. Servants still carry trays past, but by the time they reach those benches, there's little left but scraps and bones. Banquets are ladders carved into loaves and meat, and everyone knows they're rung. You tear another hunk of bread, wipe your greasy fingers on your tunic, and try not to dwell on the realization that none of this food will be refrigerated tonight. Leftovers will be salted, stewed, or, let's be honest, passed off again tomorrow. In a world without fridges, leftover often means conveniently aged. If you've ever pulled weak, old takeout from the back of your fridge and wondered whether it's worth the risk, congratulations, you've already dined medieval style. The music swells again, this time with drums and pipes joining the fiddles. The rhythm pounds through the benches, urging the crowd toward movement. A space is cleared near the center, and dancers spill into it, men stomping, women twirling, sleeves and skirts sweeping the rushes. The floor vibrates with each thump, and for a moment you forget the smoke, the grease, the dogs underfoot. For a moment it's just energy, joy, bodies moving, because what else is there to do on a winter's night in a stone hall but eat, drink, and dance until your legs give out? And yet, beneath the laughter and music, you sense the tension. These feasts are not just merriment, they're statements. Every goblet raised, every swan roasted, every note of music is a reminder that power flows from the Lord at the days. If he can summon such bounty, such spectacle, imagine what else he can summon when displeased. You laugh along with the jokes, cheer at the songs, but somewhere deep down you keep glancing toward the days, as if the Lord's gaze might land on you at any moment. The man beside you sloshes ale onto your trencher, and doesn't even notice. You sigh and eat around the puddle. This, apparently, is the cost of admission. Better sticky bread than insulting your host by refusing food. Better grace on your hands than hunger in your stomach. You remind yourself that half the kingdom would kill for this feast, and here you are, ankle deep in rushes, gnawing goose like it's the most natural thing in the world. The trumpets blare again, announcing yet another course, and you begin to wonder how much more you can possibly fit into your stomach. But this is only the beginning. The night has many hours left, and the banquet has tricks yet to reveal. Strange dishes will arrive, rules of etiquette will tighten, and what begins in laughter may end in something altogether less pleasant. Because if you think grace and pigeons were the strangest things to land on this table, well, just wait until the boar's head arrives. The servants return in formation, carrying trays so vast they look like fragments of a ship's hull. The music softens, the conversations hush, and every eye tilts toward the days. Something important is about to arrive. You can feel the shift in the air, the same anticipatory silence that falls over a modern crowd when the bride finally enters the room, or when the waiter brings out the birthday cake covered in sparklers. Except here, instead of cake, it's a boar's head. It gleams under the candlelight, roasted until the skin looks lacquered, the snout gaping as if mid-snarl. An apple is wedged in its jaws, not to improve the flavor but to reassure everyone that this beast has been conquered, tamed, and, ironically, sweetened. The head rests on a bed of herbs, its tusks polished like ivory, its eyes replaced with something glassy and unsettling. The whole hall leans forward as though admiring a painting. And truly, this is art, grisly, oily art meant to impress onlookers with its scale. The steward steps forward to announce the dish with the solemnity of a priest. His Latin drones on, too lofty for most to follow, but that isn't the point. Ceremony is the point. The boar's head isn't simply meat. It's a trophy, a symbol that the lord of this hall can kill, command, and display even nature's fiercest creatures. To be served this is to be reminded of the hierarchy. You are safe here only because your host wills it. The carving begins. The first slices are not for you, of course. They are for the Lord and his closest guests. Down here at your bench, the meat will arrive in scraps, and by then it may be more gristle than glory. But you clap anyway, because that's your role, and no one wants to be the sullen guest at a feast. Your trencher has seen better days, soggy with stew and ale stains, but it soon receives a lump of boar flesh glistening with fat. You tear into it with your dagger, trying not to think about the tusks that only moments ago pointed at your throat. The meat is surprisingly tough, threaded with sinew, but rich, smoky, satisfying in a way that speaks of forests and hunts and danger. This is not farmed meat, not carefully fattened cattle. This is wild, violent, and meant to remind you of the chase. As you chew, a song begins. A group of clerics pressed into entertainment duty raise their voices in a carol praising the bounty of the feast. Their voices echo off the stone walls, their Latin phrases slipping over the crowd like incense. Most of the hall hums, along without knowing the words, the way modern guests might mumble through a hymn at a wedding service. You join in too, because it seems safer than sitting in silence, while everyone else sings about divine blessing and roasted pigs. But then, just as the solemnity seems ready to smother the joy, a juggler leaps into the open space, tossing knives into the smoky air. The clerics glare, the Lord chuckles, and the crowd roars. Knives spin dangerously close to the rafters, and you wonder whether they'll come down clean or embedded in someone's skull. Either way, the juggler will be remembered, and that's half the point. The woman with the picnic blanket sleeves leans toward you, whispering that the last time this particular juggler performed, he sliced open his own ear. She says it with glee, as if hoping history will repeat itself. You smile politely, suddenly aware of how close the blades are wearing above your head. Medieval entertainment does not come with health and safety regulations. The music picks up again, louder, brusher, and the dancers return. This time, though, the Lord himself stands to join them, plucking a lady from the crowd with a smile that brooks no refusal. The hall claps in rhythm as he leads her into a stamping circle, their steps more ceremonial than skilled. You realize that this too is theatre. The Lord shows his vigor, his wealth, his benevolence by dancing with his subjects. And everyone, including you, is expected to cheer as though he's invented movement itself. Your neighbor slaps your back, nearly knocking your trencher into your lap. "Drink," he shouts, thrusting a jug into your hand. You oblige, gulping the ale, which by now tastes less like liquid bread and more like warm mud. But it does the job. Your cheeks flush, your shoulders relax, and suddenly the juggler's knives seem less threatening and the boar's head less grotesque. You begin to understand how these banquets can stretch on for hours, even days. With enough ale, even trenchers soaked in goose fat can feel like delicacies. Still, etiquette whispers in the back of your mind. Don't reach across the table. Don't gnaw on bones too obviously. Don't fling food at the dogs, tempting though it may be when one rests its drooling chin on your knee. The rules aren't written down, but they're enforced by the sideways glances of those around you. One wrong move, and you're not just rude, you're suspect. In a hall like this, manners are politics, and politics is everywhere. The seating order, the size of the platters, the order in which dishes arrive, all are carefully calculated. The merchant across from you is served slightly later than the knight beside you, and he notices. His smile falters, his eyes narrow, and though no words are spoken, you can tell this small slight will be remembered long after the last pie is eaten. A banquet is a battlefield fought with cutlery and glances, not swords. You wipe your hands again on your tunic, feeling the sticky residue cling like glue. It's not exactly dignified, but neither is wiping them on the dog, which some guests are doing quite openly. Hygiene here is less about being clean than about appearing to belong. If you're filthy in the right company, you're fine. If you're too neat, too dainty, you're suspicious. The Lord claps his hands, and a new dish is brought forth, a peacock, roasted and dressed in its feathers, tail spread wide in a fan of iridescent green and blue. The sight is stunning, absurd, and just a little unsettling. You half expect it to shriek. No one will eat it. Peacock meat is stringy, almost inedible, but that's not the point. The point is to marvel, to gasp, to remember that your host has wealth enough to roast beauty itself and place it on the table. You glance at your trencher, piled with scraps and sauces, and think how modern buffets, with their plastic sneeze guards and bland potatoes, would look pale beside this wild theatre. Here, food is spectacle, status, story, and you, lucky or not, are part of it. But even as you lift another greasy morsel to your lips, you notice the servants at the edges, watching. They scurry with platters, but they also listen, memorize, tally who eats what and who glares when. Tonight's merriment will ripple outward as gossip tomorrow, and that gossip, whispered in kitchens and courtyards, can topple reputations faster than any sword. So you laugh, you cheer, you clap when expected. You join in the song, even if you don't know the words. You eat more than you want, drink more than you should, and pretend this is the best night of your life. Because in a way it is, and in another, it's survival. And if you think this balance of pleasure and danger is strange, wait until you see what happens when the feast turns toward religion. The air shifts again. You feel it before you hear it. The music dims, the laughter hushes, and even the dogs seem to retreat into the shadows. The Lord on the dais rises, his goblet raised not in toast, but in solemnity. The jester disappears like smoke. The jugglers slink back to the walls, and in their place the clerics step forward, robes brushing the rushes, as if sweeping away the sins of the hall. One begins to chant in Latin, slow and deliberate, the syllables bouncing against the stone like soft drum beats. Another swings a censer, smoke curling in ghostly trails that mingle with the greasy haze already clogging the rafters. The smell is thick, part incense, part roasted boar, part humanity, and together it's dizzying, like stepping into a cathedral where someone left the oven on. Everyone bows their heads. You do too, mostly to avoid sticking out like a daisy in a field of thorns. The cleric's words roll on, praising the Lord for bounty, for protection, for the noble master who has so generously slaughtered half the forest for tonight's supper. It's less a prayer than a press release, but no one says so. Instead, murmured amens ripple across the benches, accompanied by the soft shuffle of feet as guests cross themselves. Then, as quickly as the solemnity descended, it evaporates. The clerics retreat, the censer smoke thins, and a fiddler strikes up a tune so lively it feels almost profane after all that piety. The hall exhales, tension dissolving into laughter once again. A man across from you raises his mug, winks, and gulps half its contents in one go, wiping his beard with the back of his hand. Holiness observed, indulgence resumed. That's the rhythm here, faith to temper excess, excess to remind you of faith. A servant clears the remains of your boar scrap, scraping it onto a tray already piled high with bones and soggy trenchers. You wonder where it's all going. To the kitchen, to the dogs, to the poor huddled outside. The answer is yes to all three in that order. The good cuts return to the kitchens, destined for tomorrow's stew. The bones and bread end up with the hounds or the needy, depending on the Lord's mood and the number of hungry mouths pressing at the gate. And the trenches. The truth is less noble. Some will be gathered into barrels, soaked and fermented into something vaguely resembling pig feed. Others will be gnawed by servants desperate for leftovers. Either way, you decide to stop thinking about your own soggy bread, plate and its eventual fate. At the far end of the hall, a group of young men have begun a drinking contest. They slam their mugs on the table, demanding more ale, then tilt their heads back like cranes at a pond. Foam drips down their chins, their eyes gleam, and the crowd eggs them on with cheers and rhythmic pounding on the wood. You can almost hear the hangovers forming, groaning ghosts that will haunt them tomorrow. It's entertaining, though, watching dignity unravel so fast. Your neighbor nudges you, slurring something about joining in. You laugh it off, though he insists, trying to shove a mug into your hand. Politely, you wave him away, because you're not entirely convinced you'd make it through even one round without ending up face first in the rushes. And you'd rather not explain to your future self why you're wearing yesterday's bread as a hat. More dishes arrive. Custards glistening like sunshine caught in bowls. Jelly made from boiled bones, quivering with every stomp of the dancers. Spiced wine, red as rubies, so sweet it coats your tongue like syrup. You sip, wincing as the sugar clings. Medieval palates adored sweetness and spice the way modern ones adore salt and fat. To them, pepper and cinnamon were worth their weight in gold. To you, it tastes like someone poured perfume into mulled wine. Still, you nod approvingly, because grimacing at the Lord's favorite recipe might not be wise. The dogs grow bold now, noses nudging at trenchers, tails sweeping cups from benches. One climbs up onto a stool, paws on the table, until a servant shoos it down with a sharp kick. No one seems shocked. Animals belong here as much as people do. You glance around and spot a cat darting between benches, eyes gleaming like coins in the firelight. It pauses just long enough to snag a pigeon bone, then vanishes under a bench. The medieval hall is less dining room than ecosystem, each creature staking its claim. You lean back, your stomach groaning its protests. And yet more keeps coming. Eels coiled in pies like edible snakes. Venison roasted until it collapses into tender shreds. A dish of lampreys that look far too alive for comfort. Guests cheer each new arrival, clapping their greasy hands as though greeting old friends. You clap too, though your enthusiasm is tempered by the realization that someone expects you to eat these things. The jester returns, balancing on his hands while reciting a rhyme about a bishop's wife and a barrel of herring. The rhyme is filthy, the laughter raucous, the bishop himself pretending not to hear. You can't help but smile. Some things never change laughter at authority, the thin line between offense and amusement, and the universal delight in a joke told at the wrong person's expense. A commotion breaks out at the far bench. Two men grapple, shouting, mugs spilling ale across the rushes. A woman shrieks, someone laughs, and the whole hall seems to teeter on the edge of chaos. Before it can tip into violence, the steward storms forward, voice booming, hand raised high. The fighters are separated, scolded like naughty children, and forced back onto their benches. The hall calms, though the tension lingers like smoke. Here, even a feast can tip into brawl with frightening speed. And you can't help but notice how quickly the Lord's guards had moved, their hands on their swords before the steward even spoke. Power is fragile, and a banquet hall can turn from theatre to battlefield in the time it takes a mug to spill. By now the candles have burned low, wax puddling onto the tables, flames guttering in the smoky air. The music slows, the laughter softens, but still the food trickles out. One last course, one last jug, one last chance to prove that tonight's abundance outshines last year's. You're not sure whether to admire the persistence or fear it. A final toast is made. The Lord raises his goblet, the hall roars its approval, and everyone drinks whether they want to or not. You sip cautiously, though the man beside you drains his mug so fast it slams empty onto the table before you've swallowed. He winks, then slumps against the woman with the picnic sleeves, who rolls her eyes and shoves him off, like brushing crumbs from her lap. The servants begin to clear in earnest now, scraping bones into baskets, stacking trenchers, gathering jugs. The hall smells like sweat, grease, and smoke, heavier now than when you first entered. You cough, waving a hand before your face, though no one else seems to notice. For them, this is life. For you, it's survival with a side of indigestion. And as you glance toward the days, watching the Lord bask in the glow of his own magnificence, you realize that this was only the opening act. Banquets were never just about food. They were stages where power strutted, politics simmered, and danger lingered beneath the laughter. If you thought tonight was indulgent, just wait until you see what happens when the feast turns from spectacle to excess. The hall has shifted. You can feel it in your bones before you notice it with your eyes. The air that once hummed with music and clinking goblets now vibrates differently, heavier, slower, soaked with the thick wariness of ale and meat. Candles gutter lower, shadows deepen, and the laughter in the rafters takes on a harsher edge. This is no longer feasting. It is the unraveling of order. The early courses of the meal had been orchestrated with the elegance of theatre servants gliding, dishes rising like acts in a play, music bright and inviting. But now the rhythm is offbeat. Cups spill faster than they are filled. A dog fights with another beneath a bench, growling until a boot sends both scurrying. The floor rushes, already filthy with bones and bread, are slick with grease, and you hesitate to place your feet too firmly for fear of sliding. It is in this haze that true chaos always creeps into a medieval banquet. You begin to see what the polished histories rarely tell, that after the third or fourth toast, courtesy grows thin, and the night becomes a contest of endurance rather than refinement. At the high table, the Lord reclines more than he sits, his cheeks flushed, his crown of authority slightly askew. His voice booms, calling for more music, more wine, more of everything, as if the very idea of ending the night is an insult to his status. The musicians obey, fiddles and lutes striking a tune, almost desperate in its cheerfulness. But beneath their notes, you hear it, the murmurs, the slurred insults, the cackles at someone else's expense. You glance across the benches and spot a group of young squires red-faced with drink, boasting of their bravery, each tale louder than the last. One describes slaying a wild boar with nothing but a spear. Another interrupts, claiming he once fought off 3 men at once in the forest. The boasts grow ridiculous until even their companions roll their eyes. Yet they cheer each other anyway, because in the fog of drink, truth bends easily to flattery. A few places down, a woman, noble by her velvet sleeves, dangerous by the sharpness in her smile, leans close to a man not her husband. Their whispers vanish beneath the music, but the way her hand lingers on his arm leaves little doubt about their intent. You wonder how many secrets are birthed in halls like this, tucked between platters of venison and barrels of ale. Some whispered liaisons might last a night, others a lifetime, a few might even topple dynasties. The jester, emboldened by drink, or perhaps by the Lord's indulgence, leaps onto the table. He dances between trenchers, kicking bones aside, juggling knives with a grin that borders on maniacal. The crowd roars its approval, clapping in time, though you notice how the steward frowns from the corner. Jesters are tolerated until they cross a line. Then they vanish, quietly and permanently. Yet tonight, no one stops him, and his rhymes grow filthier, lampooning even the Lord himself. The laughter that follows is nervous, teetering between amusement and fear. A man, it happens, the first collapse. A man across the hall slumps forward, face in his trencher, his mug spilling ale into his lap. His companions laugh, shaking him, but he doesn't stir. Too much wine, too much meat, too little sense. Two servants rush over, heaving him upright, dragging his body toward the door like a sack of grain. No one else pays much mind. This is expected, the tax of indulgence. Better he fall asleep in the stable than vomit across the Lord's table. But others are not far behind him. Another man begins to sway in his seat, his song slurring into nonsense before his head drops onto his chest. Across the hall, a woman staggers, her dress stained with wine, her companions guiding her to the wall, where she sinks down, giggling. Soon the feast resembles less a celebration than a battlefield of the fallen. Men and women slumped in corners, sprawled on benches, or lying straight on the rushes. The music grows wilder. A fiddler leaps onto a bench, bow flashing furiously as dancers whirl beneath him. Feet stamp, skirts twirl, arms wave, and the floor trembles. One man tumbles into the rushes, rising with straw in his hair, laughing as though the humiliation were triumph. Another crashes into the serving table, sending trenchers flying, dogs leaping to snatch bones before they touch the ground. The line between performance and disaster blurs, and you sense how thin the thread of control has become. And then the fight begins. It always does. It starts with a shove, perhaps accidental, perhaps not. A cup spills, a voice shouts, and suddenly two men are on their feet, fists swinging. The benches rattle as companions pull them apart, but another joins, then another, until the brawl spreads like fire. Wooden cups smash against skulls, bread is hurled like missiles, and someone brandishes a bone as if it were a dagger. The jester leaps aside, laughing even as a mug narrowly misses his head. Guards surge forward, iron flashing, their presence enough to chill the room. No one wants steel drawn at a feast. The Lord's wrath would be swift. The fighters are separated with kicks and curses, dragged away like misbehaving children. One man bleeds from a cut above his eye, another clutches his ribs, but both are still breathing. The hall exhales, tension easing, though the laughter that follows is brittle, forced. The shadow of violence lingers. You realize watching that this is what makes banquets dangerous. Not the food, not the drink, but the people themselves. Too much abundance, too much pride, too many grievances bubbling beneath the surface. A smile too wide, an insult too sharp. And suddenly the celebration becomes a spark for ruin. The Lord, perhaps sensing the danger, rises once more. His voice cuts through the hall, commanding attention, ordering silence. He raises his goblet, and all follows suit, though with trembling hands and wary eyes. A final toast is made, to honor, to loyalty, to the glory of his house. The hall echoes with forced agreement, each voice loud but brittle, like glass waiting to shatter. Servants rush to end the night before it collapses entirely. Dishes are whisked away, spilled wine mopped, unconscious bodies dragged discreetly to corners. The music softens, the torches are trimmed, and the dogs are shooed from the benches. Yet the damage is done. The hall is littered with bones, puddles of wine, and the stink of sweat. The feast has not ended, it has collapsed under its own weight. And you, still seated in the corner, feel the exhaustion seep into your bones. The rushes beneath your feet are damp, the air thick, your stomach rebelling against the excess. You realize that surviving a banquet is not about eating or drinking. It is about enduring. Enduring the stench, the noise, the chaos, the dangers hidden in laughter. As you watch the hall dim, you imagine the stories that will be told tomorrow. The Lord will boast of the abundance, the guests will recall the music, the clerics will tut about the sins, and the servants will whisper about the scandals they glimpsed in corners. But none will tell of the man dragged unconscious to the stables, the woman's stained dress, the fists that nearly drew blood. Those truths remain here, in the smoky air, among the bones and spilled ale. The banquet is over, you have survived. But only just. The torches still smoulder in the hall, but their smoke has dulled into a sluggish haze, curling lazily around the rafters where banners hang limp. The music has faded. What remains is a deep, uneasy quiet, broken only by the faint groan of timber as the benches shift beneath the weight of sleeping bodies. The feast is over, but the night is not. This is when the true ordeal begins, the part that cannot be dressed in ceremony or brightened by music. This is the long, unflinching test of endurance that follows every banquet, the part no bard sings of. The rushes beneath your boots are damp, foul with the mingled debris of spilled oil, grease, and half-chewed scraps tossed aside. Somewhere close by, a dog licks at the bones scattered across the floor, gnawing loudly, its teeth clicking against marrow. A drunk snorts awake, fumbles at his mug, finds it empty, and slumps again into stupor. The smell has changed too. Not the sweet smoke of roasting meats, but the acrid stench of sweat, sick, and extinguished candles. It feels less like a hall of glory now, more like a battlefield after its fury has burned away. Servants creep about, moving with the wary tread of people who know the line between silence and punishment. They gather trenchers heavy with uneaten bread, pour wine dregs into buckets, and sweep bones into baskets. But even they cannot cleanse the stink of excess. A girl no older than 12 tries to mop a puddle of vomit near the wall, wrinkling her nose, her hands red with cold water. She will never speak of this openly, yet she will remember it always. The Lord himself has vanished, escorted to his chamber by attendants. Perhaps he will sleep, perhaps he will lie awake, heart pounding from wine and pride. Whatever his fate, his hall no longer belongs to him, but to the slow churn of exhaustion and aftermath. You look at the people still sprawled across benches and floor's nobles, slumped side by side with squires, maidens with torn sleeves snoring softly. A knight collapsed in full armor, his snores as loud as war drums. Rank matters little now. All are reduced to the same state. Flesh that has had too much and must yield to fatigue. And yet, not everyone sleeps. In the darker corners, plots linger. 2 men whisper over a jug of wine hidden beneath their cloaks. You cannot hear their words, but their eyes flick constantly toward the high table. Elsewhere, a servant boy slips a gold cup into his tunic, pausing to make sure no one notices. Theft, like hunger, waits for its chance at such feasts. If caught, he will lose more than the cup. Perhaps his hand, perhaps his life. Yet desperation dulls fear. He vanishes into the shadows, clutching his prize. The night stretches. Those who have not succumbed to drink toss restlessly, uncomfortable on the hard benches. Groans echo as men shift, clutching their stomachs. The feasting was never meant for comfort. It was display, extravagance, theater. But the human body is no stage, it rebels. And you hear it now in the retching behind a column. The moans of indigestion, the coughing of someone choking on bile. The dogs come sniffing eagerly after each sound. You lean back and close your eyes, hoping for quiet, but the hall is alive in its misery. The crackle of embers, the buzz of a fly already drawn to scraps, the faint drip of spilled wine running across the floor. A man mutters in his sleep, then shouts as though fighting in battle, his limbs flailing before he settles again into stillness. The woman beside him pulls her shawl tighter and turns away, muttering a prayer under her breath. Time loses its edges. You do not know if hours have passed or minutes. The candles sputter and die one by one, plunging the hall deeper into shadow. In the half-dark, shapes blur. A figure moves along the benches, silent, careful. A thief, or perhaps only a servant. You cannot tell. What matters is the realization that the hall is not safe. Banquets draw not only laughter but danger, and once the Lord retires, his protection thins. A drunk with a blade is no less deadly for being unsteady. Outside, the wind rises. It howls faintly through the shutters, rattles the high windows. Winter presses its fingers against the walls. Those lying on the floor curl tighter, clutching their cloaks, seeking warmth from each other. You hear teeth chattering. The fire has died too low to offer comfort, and no one dares stoke it higher without the steward's command. Hunger may have been banished with roasted boar, but cold is harder to drive away. In this strange life of the hall, where time drags and sleep comes fitful, the masks of courtesy are gone. What you see now is the raw truth of humanity stripped of display. A noblewoman's jeweled headpiece lies forgotten in the rushes. A knight's proud sword leans carelessly against a bench, his hand too limp to guard it. These objects once shone with status, now they look like abandoned relics, Powerless against fatigue, you realize how fragile power can appear once the veil of ceremony falls. A scuffle breaks out near the door. Two servants argue in harsh whispers over a leftover jug of wine. Their voices rise until a guard storms over, striking one across the face with the flat of his hand. The boy crumples silent, clutching his cheek. The other snatches the jug and flees, drinking greedily as he goes. The guard returns to his post, muttering curses. The hall falls into uneasy silence again. You wonder what bruises and scars will be carried out of here come dawn. What stories will be retold? What lies will be spun to cover the shame of the night? Your own body aches. The bench is too hard, the air too close. Sleep comes in fits, broken by snores, shouts, the clatter of a falling cup. Dreams are strange. Fevered you walk through endless halls, feast after feast, but the food turns to ashes in your mouth, the wine to blood. You wake with a start, heart racing, only to find the same hall, the same bodies strewn across the floor. Perhaps nightmares and reality are not so far apart here. Eventually light comes. At first it is only the faint paling of the shutters, a hint of dawn pressing through cracks. Then, slowly, the sky bleeds into the hall, casting its pale grey across the wreckage. The torches have burned out. The fire is cold ash, and the people stir one by one, groaning, coughing, clutching their heads. Some rise and stumble away embarrassed, eager to escape before the full shame of morning is revealed. Others linger, heads bowed, muttering prayers of apology, or oaths to never drink so much again. Few will keep those oaths. The servants move quickly now, emboldened by daylight. They strip the tables bare, sweep bones and scraps into heaps, open shutters to let the bitter air cleanse the stench. The dogs, driven out, bark furiously at the door. Buckets of water are splashed across the rushes, pushing filth into corners. What cannot be cleaned will simply be covered with new straw, hiding the sins beneath fresh layers, just as memory hides the truth beneath the stories that will be told. The Lord returns, dressed in fresh garments, his eyes heavy but his posture proud. He does not look at the wreckage, only at the assembled survivors, who bow low despite their aching heads. His voice booms once more, declaring the feast a triumph, a sign of his greatness, a night to be remembered. And the people cheer, though their throats are dry, though their stomachs turn at the thought of more food. They cheer because they must, because power demands it, because silence is more dangerous than obedience. And as you watch, you realize this is how history is written. Not in the spilled wine or the bruises, not in the groans of those who collapsed on the floor, but in the words of the powerful, who declare the chaos to have been glory. The truth rots with the bones in the rushes. Only the memory of abundance survives, polished until it shines. But you, having seen the long night, know better. You know that the banquet does not end with laughter, but with groaning, that its splendor hides filth, that its stories are built on silence. And you understand why no chronicle lingers here, in the dark hours after the feast, when the candles burn low and the night strips everyone of pretense. For this is the part of history that was never meant to be remembered, only endured. The hall has been swept, the rushes renewed, the air scrubbed with cold morning wind, yet still the scent lingers, an undertone of meat and sweat, of wine soaring on wood. What is gone is only what can be seen. The feast is declared over, the wreckage carried out, the story reshaped into triumph. But the world beyond the doors of the great chamber is not so easily polished. The banquet was not a private act of indulgence. It was a proclamation, an echo sent out into the land. And now that echo spreads, rumbling through villages, farms, fields, and hovels. The people did not sit at those tables. They did not taste the roasted boar, or drink the red wine from silver cups. Their bellies were not filled. Their laughter was not coaxed with music. They know the feast only through rumor, carried down the muddy lanes by servants and merchants who glimpse the edges of glory. But even rumor carries weight, heavier than any plate of meat. For what the feast meant was clear: the Lord has shown his wealth. He has reminded everyone who rules. In the small cottages that huddle against the cold wind, families sit by dim fires and whisper about the banquet. They imagine its excess with equal parts awe and bitterness. A man who struggled to feed his children on thin broth thinks of the shining platters of venison. A woman who baked coarse bread from barley imagines the fine white loaves torn by noble hands and tossed aside when too dry. They cannot see these things, but they can picture them with painful clarity. And so the banquet, though distant, enters their lives as another reminder of their distance from the warmth of power. Yet for some, the feast is more than a reminder, it is a command. Tomorrow taxes will be collected. Grain and hens must be handed over. Coin if there is coin to be had. The Lord cannot host such a banquet without payment from those who bend beneath him. Every shining goblet was polished with the labor of peasants. Every roasted beast was raised, fed, and slaughtered by hands that never touched the hall's fine tables. This is the true banquet, the one of labor, unseen, unpaid save in survival. The echo of the feast is the echo of obligation. The roadways outside the manor churn with footsteps and cartwheels. Tenants arrive with their dues, sacks of grain, bundles of flax, eggs carefully carried in baskets. The steward stands at the gate, tallying what arrives, his voice sharp with reprimands for those who bring too little. A poor man, his face gaunt from hunger, offers a hen smaller than expected. He bows low, pleading with hollow eyes, but the steward sneers. The hen is taken, the man dismissed with a threat of punishment if the shortfall is repeated. Behind him, the line moves on, each family waiting with tense silence. The villagers hear of the feast again here, in the steward's words. You saw how the Lord honors his guests. Will you dishonor him with stinginess? Do you think he can sit a feast without your labor? Do you wish to shame him before his peers? Thus the feast becomes an argument for obedience, a cudgel wielded against the poor. To deny is to risk not only wrath but humiliation, for the honor of the Lord is bound up in the tribute of his people. Yet honor is a strange weight. Some take pride in it, twisted pride that their suffering sustains the shine of their Lord. They say, "Better our Lord be great, for if he is mighty, we are protected." Others mutter in anger, when the steward is gone and the night is dark. Better he choke on his wine than take another egg from us. These murmurs are dangerous, but they persist, whispered like prayers into the smoke of small hearths. Meanwhile, the hall itself does not rest. Another feast will come, another display. Already the cooks are mending their pots, the seamstresses patching torn cloth, the musicians retuning their strings. A feast is never just one night. It is a cycle, a wheel that turns endlessly, grinding down those who must fuel it. In this, you begin to see that the feast is not an event but a system, a rhythm that beats across the land. Imagine the fields in spring, peasants bent double, planting, sowing, sweating. Their backs ache, their skin burns beneath the sun, their stomachs growl. They pause only to drink thin ale or eat crusts of bread, then return to work. What drives them? Survival, yes, but also the unspoken demand of the next feast. They know the harvest must be abundant enough, not only to feed themselves, but to fill the tables of the hall. If the Lord hungers, they will starve. If the Lord must display glory, they will pay the price. This pattern repeats through the seasons. In autumn, as wheat is cut and stored, a portion vanishes into the manor's granaries. In winter, when bellies shrink and children cry with hunger, the thought of the Lord's stores lingers bitterly in their minds. And in summer, when food is leanest, they hear of another banquet held with full plates and flowing drink. Thus the feast stands above them like a spectre, a reminder that their toil feeds not only their families, but the endless hunger of hierarchy. There are those who profit more directly. The merchants smile at the thought of another banquet, for they will sell spices, wine, silks, candles. Their carts roll in with cinnamon, with pepper, with honey from distant hives. They know the Lord will pay, if not with coin, then with promise, if not with promise, then with the taking of more from his tenants. For merchants, feasts are lifeblood. For peasants, they are famine. But resentment breeds stories, and stories become memory. Around village fires, men and women tell tales of lords who ate too much, who choked at their own tables, who were cursed by heaven for gluttony. These tales travel swiftly, embroidered with each retelling. They become warnings disguised as laughter, safe enough to tell among friends, yet sharp enough to carry truth. Perhaps no one dares speak directly against the feast, but the stories do it for them. They remind the hungry that even the mighty may fall, that abundance is never guaranteed. Not all echoes are bitter. Some villagers look toward the hall and imagine wonder. They dream of its torches, its music, its rich colors. A child, listening at his grandfather's knee, imagines one day standing in that glow, eating from golden plates. Even when the truth is harsher, the imagination softens it, turns it into longing. In this way, the feast becomes myth as well as burden, a shining dream for those who will never taste it. The church, too, has its say. Priests preach sermons against excess, warning that gluttony is a sin, that pride leads to ruin. Yet in the same breath, they bless the Lord's generosity, declaring that his feast shows his strength and his duty to honor guests. The contradiction is not lost on the listeners, but few speak of it. Religion, like power, has its double face. It condemns, then sanctifies, and in the end, it sustains the very order it claims to chastise. So the banquet's echo grows not only in food but in meaning. It is woven into taxes, into stories, into dreams, into sermons. It seeps into every corner of life, shaping the way people think about themselves and their place in the world. Those who feast are few. Those who bear the weight are many. And all are bound together by the spectacle of the table, whether they sit at it or not. You begin to see that history is not just what happens in the hall, but what spreads beyond it. A single night of eating and drinking reverberates across months of work and hunger. The splendor of one becomes the suffering of many. Yet without the many, the one could not shine. This is the paradox at the heart of the feast. It unites the world, but not in joy. It unites it in labor and loss, in spectacle and silence. And perhaps that is why the feast endures. For though it costs much, though it burns through lives and harvests, it creates a story so powerful that even those who suffer under it cannot entirely turn away. It is a story of greatness, of abundance, of belonging to something larger. Even if that belonging is cruel, it still holds meaning. So the echoes continue. Another day, another feast. Another generation, another banquet. The fields keep bending, the kitchens keep sweating, the tables keep filling, and the hall keeps shining. And in the quiet between, the peasants whisper, the merchants count, the priests preach, and the land carries the weight of a meal it did not eat. That is how the banquet lives, not just in the hall, but in the world around it. It is not only food and laughter. It is burden, demand, story, dream. And when you listen closely, you can hear it still, centuries later, the faint clatter of cups, the hiss of roasting meat, the groan of peasants bent in the fields. The feast is never gone. It echoes, always, in the silence of those who bore its cost. The hall is quiet again, though the silence never truly lasts. There are no instruments playing, no laughter carried upward to the rafters, no stomping feet upon the floorboards polished by countless gatherings. The feast is gone, dismantled into scraps, echoes, and stories. Yet within the bones of the place, within its beams and stones, the memory of the feast remains. Memory clings like smoke. It lingers in the cracks, it presses against the carved wood, it sits in the hollow of the hearth, long after the fire has gone cold. And though silence may reign for now, it is not empty. It is full, swollen with the weight of what has happened, and the anticipation of what will come. The silence has its own texture, its own voice. There is the hush of wind pressing against shutters, the creak of wood as it adjusts with the night's chill, the faint scratching of mice that come to claim crumbs fallen into hidden corners. To most, this is nothing. But to those who live in the hall, who serve within it, the silence is its own story. It tells them of endings, of waiting, of the steady passage of time. For after every fullness, there is emptiness. After every feast, a quiet. And it is in the quiet that people think. Thinkers of many kinds dwell within the walls. Servants, worn from their labors, finally lay their bodies down on straw mattresses and find a few hours of rest. They think not of glory, but of aching feet, of swollen fingers, of the scraps they tucked away to keep hunger at bay. Their silence is not chosen but forced, exhaustion pressing them into stillness. They close their eyes and drift into sleep, where perhaps the memory of laughter and music becomes muddled into dreams. For them, silence is both blessing and weight. Others use the silence differently. The steward, pacing the echoing corridor, counts numbers in his head. He thinks of what was spent, what must be collected. How many sacks of grain? How many hens? How much coin will be needed to balance what the Lord displayed to his guests? He mutters figures under his breath, rehearses the words he will say when tenants plead poverty. His silence is not rest. It is calculation, sharp and deliberate. The Lord himself, should he still be awake, sits with the embers of the great fire, and listens to the quiet around him. He may recall the faces of his guests, replaying words exchanged, gestures made, alliances hinted. The feast was not only pleasure, it was strategy, and strategy is born anew in the silence afterward. What was said at table lingers now in memory, sharpened into meaning. His silence is not empty either. It is thick with thought, with pride, with worry. Even the walls remember. Stone does not speak, but it absorbs. How many voices have these stones heard? How many feasts, how many silences afterward? They stand as keepers of continuity, absorbing the songs of each generation, the screams, the prayers, the laughter, the hushed plotting. Silence to them is no break, but another thread in the endless weaving of time. Outside, the silence spreads differently. The fields are dark, the cottages dim. Dogs curl against doorways, their ears twitching at distant noises, but even they know the night is not for action. Farmers rest against hard bedding. Wives curl against the cold, children breathe shallowly in their sleep. Beyond their walls, owls sweep silently through the air, foxes creep with padded paws. The forest mutters in the language of leaves and branches. Silence here is not absence but presence, the presence of all things moving quietly, unseen. And yet, if you lean close, you hear more. Silence is never truly still. It is filled with the quietest sounds, the trickle of water in the earth, the slow shift of trees, the whisper of frost forming on grass. These are the sounds beneath human hearing, the murmur of the world continuing. For when the banquet has ended, when human voices have dimmed, the larger feast goes on, the feast of nature endless, indifferent. The fox eats, the owl hunts, the soil receives. Silence is only a human word for what cannot be heard easily, but it is not nothing. In monasteries, silence holds a different weight still. Monks rise before dawn and chant softly, breaking long hours of stillness with words carefully chosen. Their silence is cultivated, disciplined. It is not exhaustion, nor calculation, nor aftermath. It is devotion. To them, silence is full of God, a space in which divine presence can be heard. Their stone cloisters echo with footsteps muffled by the habit of restraint. They eat in silence, they work in silence, they pray in silence. For them, silence is not emptiness but clarity, a way of stripping away the noise of the world. Yet even in their stillness, the echo of the feast beyond their walls reaches them. They are not untouched by the rumble of power. They know that feasts in castles mean taxes, and taxes mean more hunger at their own doors. Their silence, though holy, is still bound to the feasts of the mighty. The silence after a banquet is also when memory reshapes the story. Guests who attended recall the glow of the hall, the taste of wine, the music that stirred their hearts. Already the details begin to shift, exaggerated in retelling. By the time they describe it to others, the feast has become larger than it was, more magnificent, more impressive. Silence, therefore, is a time of myth-making, where memory begins to polish truth into legend. Each guest becomes both witness and storyteller, carrying the banquet beyond the hall, multiplying it in whispers and songs. Servants, too, remember, but differently. Their stories are of spilled wine, of scoldings, of burns from the fire, of the smell of grace clinging to their clothes. Their silence is threaded with pain and fatigue. They will tell their families not of splendor, but of how much work was demanded, how little was given back. Yet even their stories, in time, shift. Hardship is retold with humor, misfortune becomes anecdote. In silence, memory transforms, sometimes softening, sometimes sharpening. What silence reveals most is contrast. The fullness of the feast can only be felt because of the emptiness that follows. The roar of music is measured against the hush that succeeds it. Abundance is thrown into sharper relief by hunger, glory by shadow, sound by quiet. This is why silence is necessary. It frames the feast, it makes the splendor more striking in memory. Without silence, the feast would blur, one clamor upon another. Silence makes it endure. Think of it like breath. To inhale, you must exhale. To sing, you must pause. To speak, you must stop. Silence is what allows sound to exist. Without quiet, noise is meaningless. The banquet itself is loud, but it is the silence after that gives it weight, that allows it to settle into memory, to shape those who experienced it, and those who only heard of it. There is also a darker silence, the silence of those who are not allowed to speak. When peasants grumble at the injustice of their labor, they must do so quietly, for to speak openly is dangerous. Their silence is not chosen, it is forced. It is the silence of power pressing down, of words swallowed for fear of punishment. This silence is heavier than any hall could contain, because it spreads across fields and villages, muting voices that might otherwise cry out. In this way, the feast extends its reach, silencing those who pay for it. And yet silence can also be resistance. A tenant may bow silently rather than flatter, refusing to praise the Lord's excess. A servant may keep her thoughts to herself, though ordered to join in laughter. A villager may fall quiet, rather than speak the words the steward wants to hear. These small silences, almost invisible, become acts of survival, even of defiance. Not every silence is submission. Some silences bite back. In the greater span of time, silence is the soil from which history grows. Battles are remembered in noise, in shouts and drums and clashing steel. But it is the silence after, when the dead are counted, when the survivors sit in grief, when the fields fall still, that history truly settles. Feasts, too, are remembered in their silence. What endures is not only the music but the hush that followed. It is in that hush that people decided what to say of it, how to tell it, what meaning to give it. Without silence, history would be only noise. Imagine centuries later, scholars poring over records of a great banquet. The accounts speak of dozens of courses, of costly wines, of guests from far lands. But between the lines lies the silences of peasants not recorded, of servants unnamed, of songs unpreserved. History is always full of silence, not because nothing was there, but because voices were not written down. And so silence becomes as important as words, telling us as much by absence as by presence. Even now, you feel it. The silence in your room as you listen, the quiet space between sentences. Your breathing becomes part of it, your thoughts echo against it. History is not only told in noise, it is told in silence too. To notice it is to notice the shape of time itself. And so, after the feast, silence remains. Not empty, not void, but alive with memory, with calculation, with fatigue, with prayer, with resistance, with nature's endless murmur. The hall waits in its quiet. The world outside waits too. There will be another feast, another clamour. But until then, there is silence. And in that silence lies everything. The road is long, and it stretches out not only across the land, but across centuries. To travel along it is to move not simply from one place to another, but from one time to another, from one life to another. Roads are the veins of history, carrying people, goods, rumors, armies, pilgrims, and stories. They are the places where dust clings to boots, where hooves strike rhythms against the earth, where wheels cut ruts deep enough to last for generations. To walk a road is to join an unbroken chain of footsteps that began long before you and will continue long after. Every road tells its own story. Some roads were born of conquest, carved into the earth by armies that sought to bind a land to their will. Others emerged slowly, beaten into paths by herders moving their flocks, merchants bringing their wares, villagers walking to market or church. Some roads were no more than tracks through mud, widened only by repeated use. Others were raised in stone, paved so carefully that their foundations still endure beneath modern cities. But whether humble or grand, every road is written with the marks of countless journeys. Consider the Roman roads, the great ribbons of stone that stitched the empire together. Soldiers marched upon them, engineers measured them, traders carried goods across them. A Roman road could outlast its builders, so precisely laid that centuries later the bones of its stones remain, hidden beneath layers of earth and asphalt. Along such roads, the legions advanced, their sandals slapping in unison, dust rising in unbroken clouds. The silence after their passing was heavy with the knowledge of empire, that this was not only a road for walking but for ruling. Roads such as these were instruments of control, reminders that movement itself could be governed. But even the most ordinary village track carries meaning. Think of a narrow path between fields, marked only by the press of many feet. A farmer's child runs along it with bare toes. A woman carries a jug of water, balancing it carefully with each step. A priest walks it solemnly toward the churchyard, his robe trailing against the grass. The path is nothing grand, yet in its simplicity it becomes part of the daily rhythm of life. It is a road nonetheless, connecting one moment to another, one life to another. What happens upon roads cannot be separated from what happens at their edges. The tavern by the roadside welcomes weary travelers, its benches worn smooth by bodies seeking rest. Inns rise at the crossroads, places where strangers share beds and stories alike. The hermit's hut appears at the bend in the road, where pilgrims pause for blessings. Bandits lurk in the shadows of wooded lanes, waiting for the unlucky or the foolish. Roads are never only about movement, they are about encounter. To walk a road is to risk meeting, to risk change. Every traveler on a road carries more than themselves. They carry news. Before letters could be carried swiftly, before printing spread words wide, it was the traveler who bore knowledge. A merchant might tell of famine in the south. A soldier might speak of war in the north. A pilgrim might share a vision of holiness. Roads were the channels of rumor as much as fact, and so they tied together not only markets but minds. Along the road, the world grew larger. Along the road, people became aware that beyond their village lay other villages, beyond their lords' fields other lords, beyond their tongue other tongues. Yet roads also divide. They carve lines through landscapes, setting boundaries. A road may belong to a king, a toll may be charged, a right-of-way restricted. To step off the road may mean trespassing, to remain upon it may mean surveillance. Roads are both freedom and control, a promise and a leash. One can escape along them, fleeing with nothing but what one can carry. But one can also be pursued along them, caught by soldiers who know which routes a fugitive must take. Roads liberate and imprison in equal measure. Some roads are sacred. Pilgrimage routes wind across hills and rivers, marked by shrines and waystones. On these roads, people do not walk only for themselves. They walk for the sake of devotion, penance, hope. Each step becomes prayer, each mile a testament. The road to Santiago, the road to Canterbury, the road to Rome, all became more than geography. They became maps of the soul, pathways by which countless people sought to draw closer to the divine. To walk such a road was to join a vast procession of faith, stretching back through centuries, made holy not by stone or soil, but by countless footsteps yearning for grace. Other roads are haunted. The battlefield road that remembers the march of soldiers, the cries of the wounded carried away, the wheels of carts bearing bodies to shallow graves. Even when the grass grows back, when the trees lean quietly across, the road remembers. People whisper of ghosts along such roads, of shapes glimpsed in the corner of the eye, of footsteps heard where no one walks. The past clings more tightly to roads than to most places, because roads are where so much of life passed in transit. Roads are also thresholds. To step upon one is to acknowledge departure. To leave a house and walk into the dust is to admit you are going somewhere. To watch someone walk away along the road is to know they may not return. Roads carry not only goods and armies but emotions. Love in farewell, grief in parting, hope in setting out, joy in return. A child waiting at the roadside for her father to come back from war stares so hard that every dust cloud seems like him. A mother watches her son vanish toward the city and feels her heart pulled along with his steps. Roads wound and heal in equal measure. At times the road is also the teacher. For those who walk far enough, the world reveals itself. The road shows wealth and poverty, beauty and ruin, cruelty and kindness. The one who has traveled returns with eyes that have seen more, with a tongue that knows new words, with a heart that beats differently. Roads change people. Even if they come back to the same house, they are not the same as when they left. That is why some fear the road, because it can take not only bodies but souls. When night falls, the road changes character. By day it may seem safe, even friendly, marked by neighbors and markets. By night it becomes another thing entirely. Shadows lengthen, noises grow sharper, the ordinary becomes uncanny. The traveler by moonlight feels alone, every rustle of the hedgerow a threat. Yet there is wonder, too. The stars above stretching wider than the day ever reveals, the silvered shapes of trees, the cool air carrying scents unnoticed before. Night on the road is fear and beauty woven tightly together. For centuries, roads were measured not in miles but in days. A journey was not 20 miles but 2 days' walk, not 100 miles but a week's march. The road was felt through the body, through blisters, through hunger, through thirst, through weariness. To move was to be vulnerable, dependent on weather, on the charity of strangers, on the endurance of one's legs. Modern measures of speed and distance cannot capture this older intimacy with the road, when every step was counted by flesh, and not by wheels or machines. It is worth remembering, too, that roads are made of silence. They echo when carts rattle upon them, when armies thunder across, when singers walk with their songs. But for most of the time, they lie in stillness. Dust settles, grass grows at their edges, rain fills their ruts. The silence of roads is as important as their sound. It is the silence that allows the memory of footsteps to linger, that holds the weight of all that has passed. Roads are like rivers whose currents are not water but silence, broken only when lives move across them. And even when they vanish, roads endure. A path may be forgotten, overgrown with bramble, paved over by new streets. But if you look closely, if you read the land, you can find them. A faint dip in the field where wagons once rolled. A line of trees where soil was disturbed long ago. A place name that remembers what the tongue of the present has forgotten. Roads are ghosts that never wholly die. They survive in maps, in ruins, in the very shape of the earth. To speak of history without speaking of roads is to miss the way people truly lived. For the hall may host the feast. The field may grow the crop. The church may offer prayer. But it is the road that binds them all, that lets them speak to one another, that spreads both bread and plague, both joy and terror. Roads are history's quiet arteries, unnoticed at times, but always carrying the lifeblood of the world. And so, to walk a road is not only to go somewhere. It is to join a story far greater than oneself. Every step is an echo of steps already taken. Every mile a page in a book already written, and yet still writing itself. The road does not end. It only bends, it only vanishes into horizon or memory. For as long as there are people, there will be roads. And as long as there are roads, there will be stories, carried on dust, written in silence, spoken by those who dare to walk them. The sea has always been more than water. To those who lived beside it, who set their nets in its depths or their sails upon its swells, the sea was both a gift and a terror. It offered food, trade, riches, and freedom, but also storms, shipwrecks, and graves without markers. To live near the sea was to live near a boundary that was never fixed, always shifting with tide and weather. Unlike a wall or a road, the sea could not be built or owned. It could only be entered, with courage or desperation, with prayer or silence. Imagine the fisherman who wakes before dawn, his small boat creaking as he pushes it down into the surf. The world is dark, the air sharp with salt. The horizon is an unseen line, somewhere out there beyond the black waves. He rows with steady arms, guided by habit and instinct more than sight. When the sun finally rises, the sea reveals itself in dazzling brilliance, glittering as though it were a floor of broken glass. For him, the sea is survival. Each catch is a question answered. Will the family eat? Will there be enough to sell? The sea does not give easily, and its gifts are never guaranteed. For the merchant, the sea is something different. A highway, a chance to reach other shores. A ship laden with grain, olive oil, wine, or spices moves slowly but steadily across the waters, carrying not only goods but ideas. Languages, fashions, faiths, and diseases spread across oceans and seas long before paper or ink could keep pace. A port city might hear 5 different tongues in its marketplace before midday. The voices of sailors from lands, never glimpsed by the townsfolk who bought their wares. The sea was the great connector, binding distant coasts into a single, shifting web of contact. Yet the sea was also mystery. Whole stretches of it lay beyond the known maps. Even when charts were made, they showed only edges, jagged lines of coast with empty space beyond. Those empty spaces were filled with imagination. Sea monsters with curling tails, dragons that rose from the deep, whirlpools that swallowed ships whole. The unknown was given form and teeth. Sailors swore they saw lights dancing upon the waves at night, or heard voices calling their names. The sea was never just water, it was a canvas onto which fear and wonder were painted in equal measure. To stand on the shore is to feel both small and infinite. The line where sea meets sky is unreachable, yet it draws the gaze again and again. Children play at the water's edge, daring the waves to catch their feet. Lovers walk with hands joined, their words carried away by the wind. Elders sit and watch, remembering lives shaped by journeys that began or ended on that shifting horizon. The shore is where hope is born and where grief is endured. It is where farewells are spoken, where welcomes are shouted, where bodies are washed back by the tide. Storms make the sea another world entirely. The calm blue surface turns grey, then black, whipped into mountains of water that rise and crash with deafening power. A ship caught in such weather becomes as fragile as a leaf. Men cling to ropes, shout prayers, curse the gods, or fall silent in despair. Waves pound until wood splinters, sails tear, masts snap. In such moments, the sea shows its true face, not gentle provider, not welcoming path, but force beyond human control. When the storm passes, wreckage drifts upon the surface, barrels, planks, perhaps bodies. The sea keeps what it will. Yet even its danger drew people toward it. The sea tempted with riches that could not be found on land. Pearls hidden within shells, salt to be harvested from evaporating bays, fish in uncountable numbers, whales yielding oil and bone. Kingdoms fought to control coasts, not only for harbors, but for the promise of what could be taken from the waves. Pirates too found their place upon the sea, preying upon the fat-bellied merchant ships, turning the water into a stage for violence and greed. The same waves that carried trade also carried theft, and to sail was to accept both risk and gain. For some, the sea was a teacher. It taught patience, for winds do not come when commanded. It taught humility, for even the greatest captain could be humbled by a sudden storm. It taught endurance, for long voyages stretched into weeks of hunger and thirst when provisions ran low. And it taught the truth that the world was larger than one village, one kingdom, one sea. Every journey outward revealed more coasts, more people, more ways of life. The sea expanded the imagination, forcing humanity to admit that it was not alone, not central, not in control. For others, the sea was punishment. Exile across water was a common sentence in many lands. To be cast out meant not only separation from family, but from soil itself. For those who believed identity was rooted in land, in ancestors buried nearby, the sea was the cruelest divide. Once crossed, it was not easily recrossed. Those forced to leave watched the shoreline vanish, until it was only a line of smoke, colored shadow, and then nothing. The sea swallowed their past, as surely as it bore them to an uncertain future. Even the sound of the sea carried weight. The crash of surf upon rocks was a lullaby to some, a warning to others. The whisper of waves along a sandy beach could soothe, could lull children to sleep, could remind travelers of home when they heard it in foreign lands. Sailors spoke of the creak of timbers, the slap of rope against mast, the endless rhythm of water against hull as a language of its own. The sea had a voice, and those who lived near it learned to listen, to hear in its tones both promise and peril. The sea also reshaped memory. Tales of those lost at sea were harder to tell than those who died upon land. There was no grave to visit, no stone to carve, only the knowledge that somewhere beneath the waves lay the body of the beloved. This absence made the sea itself into a vast cemetery, unmarked and unending. Songs were sung to remember the drowned, prayers cast like nets into the air, but the water gave back nothing but its own silence. The grief of the sea was different, more diffuse, because it had no edges. And yet, despite all this, people kept going back to it. The pull of the horizon was too strong. The sea promised more than fear. It promised change. A boy in a poor village could become a sailor and see lands his parents never dreamed of. A merchant could grow wealthy enough to reshape the life of his children. A pilgrim could cross the water to reach shrines thought holier for being distant. The sea was the road that never ended, the path that led to every other path. In stories and songs, the sea became a mirror of human longing. It was endless, like ambition. It was deep, like sorrow. It was ever-changing, like love. It reflected the sky, turning blue when the heavens smiled, turning black when storms raged. To tell a story by the fire was often to include the sea, its dangers, its mysteries, its hopes. It was not merely background but character, shaping fates with a will of its own. And when finally death came to those who had lived by the sea, the water still claimed a role. Ashes might be scattered upon the waves. Stones might be carved with ships to mark the passing of sailors. Families might stand upon the shore, looking out, remembering. Even those who had never left their village might feel the sea as presence, as boundary, as promise. For the sea belongs not only to sailors but to all who dream, all who wonder what lies beyond. To speak of the sea is to speak of contradiction. It is generous and cruel, familiar and alien, constant and ever-changing. It erases boundaries even as it creates them. It swallows history even as it carries it. No one can claim to master it, Yet countless lives have been built upon it. It remains the oldest frontier, the first horizon, the last mystery. And always it waits, with its endless voice, calling those who dare, those who hope, those who despair. For the sea is not simply water. It is the oldest story we know, and the newest one still being written with every tide. Time moves differently when it is remembered. What once felt endless in the moment often shrinks to a flicker in memory, while moments that seemed fleeting at the time grow immense, filled with meaning long after their passing. To live is to move forward, but to remember is to wander backward through paths that change each time they are walked. Memory is not a fixed stone but a river, and like the sea, it carries fragments, drifts them against one another, wears them down, reshapes them. To speak of the past, then, is to acknowledge that it is never whole, never still. It is scattered across recollections, songs, stories, documents, and silences. The past is alive, but its life is not steady. It shifts with each retelling. Consider the memory of a city. Walls crumble, fires sweep, rulers rise and fall. Yet within the minds of those who lived there, the city endures in fragments. The sound of market stalls, the smell of bread baked in a familiar oven, the feel of stone underfoot on a certain street. When exiles remember, they recall more intensely what has been lost. They may speak of a square that no longer stands, of bells that have long been silenced, of alleys that are rubble and dust. But in their memory, these things are not rubble. They are alive, vivid, unbroken. Memory preserves what the world cannot, yet also distorts, because it is a vessel shaped by longing. Families, too, are held together by memory. The names of ancestors are carried across generations, whispered at hearths, or written in books of genealogy. But the act of remembering is also the act of choosing. Which stories are told and which are forgotten. A grandfather's courage may be remembered, his cruelty excused into silence. A mother's sacrifice may be honored, while her grief is unspoken. Memory shapes lineage not through what truly was, but through what is chosen to endure. This choice is both fragile and powerful, for it is through memory that people come to know who they are. And what of forgetting? If memory is a river, forgetting is the fog that drifts across its surface, hiding what lies beneath. Forgetting is often feared, as though to forget is to betray. Yet forgetting can also be a mercy. Not all pasts are gentle. There are wounds best left unstirred, traumas that cannot be carried anew each day. Communities scarred by war, famine, or plague often choose to silence certain histories, not because they are gone, but because they are too heavy. Forgetting, then, is not the absence of memory, but a different form of survival. But even when people try to forget, traces remain. The land remembers in its own way. A battlefield may grow grass, but the soil is heavy with bones. A ruined temple may crumble into hillsides, yet its stones remain, waiting to be uncovered. Memory is etched not only in human minds but in earth itself, in ruins and relics, in scars across landscapes. Archaeologists dig, historians write, storytellers weave, all of them seeking to draw memory back from silence, to give shape again to what once was. But every reconstruction is partial, every telling incomplete. The past is never whole, only glimpsed in fragments, like pottery shards pieced together, but never complete. Songs have always been memory's companions. A melody can carry words far beyond the reach of parchment. When sung, the memory of battles, loves, journeys, and losses lingers long after the singers are gone. Songs are less concerned with accuracy than with endurance. They repeat, they exaggerate, they polish, they change. Yet even as they change, they carry something true, something that lodges in the heart more firmly than fact. A song remembered is a past still alive, even when the names within it have blurred into legend. There is a quiet grief in knowing that so much is lost. Whole civilizations have passed with barely a trace. Their language is gone, their names unknown, their memories scattered. We walk upon ground where countless others once stood, yet we do not know their faces, their voices, their dreams. Memory is not equally kind. Some lives are written in books, carved in stone, sung in ballads. Others vanish, unrecorded, as though they never were. But absence itself is its own kind of presence. To reflect upon what is forgotten is to recognize the enormity of human silence, the vastness of what has slipped away. Yet memory does not vanish entirely. Sometimes it lingers in strange ways. A ritual performed without knowing its origin. A superstition followed though its roots are lost. a word spoken in a language no longer fully understood. These are shadows of memory that persist, even after clarity has faded. They are the echoes of what once was, speaking faintly into the present. Cultures are built upon such echoes, layer upon layer of half-remembered practices, beliefs, and habits, each one shaping the future without revealing the past that bore it. Personal memory, too, is both fragile and enduring. An old woman may forget her own name, yet remember a lullaby sung to her as a child. A man may forget his daily chores, yet still recall the exact smell of a spring morning in his youth. Memory does not always obey logic. It emerges when it chooses, often tied to senses rather than words. The taste of a certain fruit, the feel of a certain fabric, the sound of a certain bird can unlock doors long closed. In this way, memory proves itself to be more than thought. It is sensation, emotion, presence. The great question of memory is whether it belongs to the living or to the dead. Do we remember for ourselves, to know who we are? Or do we remember for those who are gone, so that they are not swallowed entirely by silence? Each candle lit on an anniversary, each story told at a grave, each name repeated aloud, is an act of resistance against forgetting. To remember is to give the dead a kind of second life, however brief. And yet, in time, all names are forgotten. Memory is always a temporary bridge. But while it lasts, it is enough. Memory can also deceive. Two people may live through the same event yet recall it differently. Each memory is colored by fear, by love, by anger, by hope. Over time, the mind smooths rough edges, alters tones, shifts details. The story of what happened becomes the story of what is remembered, and the two are never identical. Nations, too, build collective memories that often serve power. Victories are celebrated, defeats minimized, crimes excused, martyrs exalted. History is memory in formal dress, and like all memory, it is partial. But even knowing its flaws, we cannot live without memory. It is the thread that ties the present to the past, that makes continuity possible. Without memory, there is only the isolated instant, the eternal now. Memory is what allows us to learn, to hope, to grieve, to build. It is what binds generations together in invisible chains. What makes the child the hair of the parent, the student the hair of the teacher. Memory is fragile, yes, but it is also the most enduring part of human life. In dreams, memory often comes unbidden. The face of one long dead may appear, as vivid as if still alive. A place thought forgotten may return with startling clarity. Dreams remind us that memory is not wholly under our command. It moves where it wills, carrying us back to what we thought we had lost. Such dreams can comfort or haunt, but they reveal that the past is never truly gone. It sleeps within us, waiting. One day, we too will become memory. Our words, our actions, our loves and failings will fade into the recollections of others, then into silence, then perhaps into fragments rediscovered by chance centuries later. To think of this is both humbling and consoling. We are not meant to be eternal. Yet while we are remembered, however briefly, we remain part of the great river of human life, carried forward into currents we cannot see. And so, memory is both a burden and a gift. It weighs us with sorrow, yet it lifts us with love. It deceives us, yet it teaches us. It fades, yet it endures in strange and unexpected ways. To remember is to be human. To forget is also to be human. The two are not opposites but companions, twining together like threads in a single tapestry. When the last story is told tonight, when the last word fades into silence, what remains is memory. Not the whole of the past, not the exact truth, but something softer, gentler, more enduring. The memory of having shared a moment, of having listened, of having wandered together through shadows of history. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the work of memory is not to preserve everything, but to preserve enough to remind us that we are not alone, that others have lived, hoped, suffered, and dreamed before us. And when we close our eyes, drifting into sleep, we too join the long procession of memory. Our dreams become part of that vast, shifting river. Our lives, in time, will be carried forward in the recollections of others.